Okay, hello and welcome to Beyond Reproach. This is Tux Lurzel.
And Stephanie Domingo.
I am coming to you from Detroit, Michigan, where I record on land belonging to the Ottawa, Potawatomi, Wyandot, and Ojibwe nations.
And I am coming to you from Medellin, Colombia, where I'm recording on land belonging to the Carina peoples.
Love that. And these are some of many nations out here in the world still very much doing their thing. And we would like to acknowledge that.
Yes, as Dev said, snaps to them.
Yes. Yeah. So, so for those of you who may have forgotten since last week, Beyond Reproach is the show about scandals and scandalousness in American politics and government. And as per usual, we be drinking and we be swearing.
Yes, we are back on our bullshit, our regular bullshit. I know you guys have missed us. I mean, we haven't been gone, but we just had guests. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it has been the timing of having guests come on and do their own stories, so we didn't have to research anything last month was like chef's kiss, especially
Such
around the
a treat.
holidays. Yeah.
Yes. We're doing
I-
this every year now for
Yeah.
December.
Yeah. It has to happen.
Mhm.
Well, so we're recording those episodes in December, but they're released in January for the listeners. So it works out, the timing works out perfectly for everyone because it's less work for us to do in the, pandemonium leading up to the holidays, but it also is like a great way to kick off the new year, I think, as well.
Yeah. Yeah, having our friends of the pod on, we're definitely
For
gonna
sure.
keep it going because it's so much fun.
I wish we could do guests every episode. It would be way too much to try
Same!
and keep track of, but it's so much
Yeah.
fun.
It's so much fun, god. Yeah.
So today, it's just the two of us today, but we are entertaining a guest named Tom Collins.
Ha! Stop it, I hate you.
Yes.
I'm just like,
Yeah,
"Wait,
today
what? Entertaining a
yeah,
guest? Huh,
no. Who? Wait, what?
yeah."
Yeah, we are drinking a cocktail today called the Tom Collins.
Over here with my bald eyes, and there's a guest.
But you got your microblading
Yes.
done, so it doesn't
I
matter
got my
anymore.
eyebrows done, guys. Like, I'm a new woman. Like, don't
Yes.
talk to me. I'm too cute.
My
It's
mom just had it done recently too. She loves it.
Yeah, I've only done the first phase. You have to go twice because it kind
Mhm.
of like it'll scab over and then it'll just kind of fade color a bit. But that second day after they were done, my eyebrows were so dark. It was glorious. So amazing. The woman who did it, she warned me. She's like, "It's gonna get really dark, but it's not gonna be that color. Like, I have to warn people because they start blowing up my phone like I did something wrong to them." And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
no." Meanwhile, I loved it. I'm like, "I wish this could stay."
Yeah, that's funny. I've actually thought about doing it myself because for whatever reason, as I've aged, my eyebrows have just lightened up so much. And like I never even really noticed it was happening because it obviously happened super gradually. And
Yeah.
then I was looking at pictures from like high school and college and was like, wait a minute, where the fuck
Oh,
have my eyebrows gone?
really? That's
Yeah.
hilarious. Wow. Okay, now I need to look back at old pictures of you.
Yeah. But Russell said for whatever reason that they haven't really perfected it for men yet because men tend to have like less manicured eyebrows and it tends to look best with like a straight
No, the
edge or
woman who did
something.
my brows has male clients too.
Oh, weird.
You need to come to Colombia. I'll come with
I
you.
mean, I will. I'll be right there.
I know. Oh my god. Hux is coming for a visit, everyone. It's so
I am.
exciting.
Yeah, I will. By the time this comes out, I think I'll already be home, but
Yeah,
I'm leaving the day after we record this. Yeah. I cannot wait. And maybe I'll be getting my eyebrows done.
I know a great one.
I know a place. But then I have to go back for the second round.
Yes, you have to
Yeah.
be back in 6 weeks for the
Yeah.
second
That's
one. Yeah.
but yeah, so back to our dear friend Tom Collins here.
Yes.
So when Stephanie told me that her story today is from 1977, I have to admit, I was deeply disappointed that I was going to have to find yet another terrible cocktail from the 70s that neither of us were going to enjoy very much. But when I started Googling lists of cocktails from the 70s, that's usually, especially like for later eras after like the 50s, I just Google popular cocktails 1980s, whatever. I kept coming up with lists that were saying have a Tom Collins, drink a Tom Collins. Everybody was drinking Tom Collins in the 70s. And I was like, oh, I wish we could just have a Tom Collins. I know they're delicious, but we've already had one. And then I was like, wait a minute, have we had one? And ended up having to go back and look at our list. There's
Yeah, I
so many. I
know.
mean, this is episode 65. So
Damn.
that means we have had 65 different cocktail or 64 different cocktails before this.
Yeah.
So it's getting hard to keep track of what we've already drank. But what happened was way back in episode 7, we had an individual serving of a gin punch. And that recipe was very similar to a Tom Collins. And basically, the history of the punch that we were drinking, I basically said the cocktail, the Tom Collins, sort of evolved out of this punch recipe that we're drinking.
What was the drink name?
It
I
was
don't
called
remember.
the gin punch.
It was called just a gin punch, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
We've
but
had so many drinks.
it was essentially this. It was like gin, lemon juice, a little sweetener, and some soda water.
Mhm.
But it was originally served as a punch, but I was doing it in individual servings, and I was like, "This is actually really similar to a Tom Collins."
Ah, okay.
So and I kind of talked a little bit in that episode about the history of the Tom Collins, even though I was also telling the history of this gin punch recipe. So, while the Tom Collins was super popular in the 1970s, it was actually invented at least 100 years earlier. While we don't know for sure who exactly came up with the recipe, we do know that the first recorded, like written Tom Collins recipe is from the second edition of Jerry Thomas's Bartender's Guide, published in 1876. We also know that the name probably came from this weird prank that was going around New York City in the early 1870s. I think I talked about this in the Gin Punch episode. So if this sounds familiar, just let me know. But basically, what was going on was like a bunch of kids or friends or whatever started telling people in bars that a man named Tom Collins was going around the city. This sounds
Yes.
familiar. Yeah.
Yes.
So this man, Tom Collins, is going around the city telling lies about them
Yeah.
and like saying that they had better find this dude, Tom Collins, who was probably at the bar, and they had to stop him from slandering them even more. So whoever heard this story would run up to the bar and be like, "Where's Tom Collins? Where's this guy, Tom Collins?" And supposedly, some bartenders decided to make up a drink that they could serve to anyone who came to the bar asking for Tom Collins.
Okay.
So they're like, the guy comes up, "Where's Tom Collins?" They're like, "Here he is. You have to pay for this now." Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
They
from
hired those
this
kids.
yeah,
It was like
totally,
guerrilla
yeah,
marketing.
yeah. So from New York, this prank spread to other cities, and in 1874, the Gettysburg Compiler wrote, "Have you seen Tom Collins? If you haven't, perhaps you had better do so, and as quick as you can, for he is talking about you in a very rough manner, calling you hard names and altogether saying things about you that are rather calculated to induce people to believe there is nothing you wouldn't steal short of a red-hot stove."
Oh my god. That's incredible.
Yes.
And short of a red hot stove? Wow. That's
This
so weird.
I know. So they go on to say, "This is about the cheerful substance of a very successful practical joke which has been going the rounds of the city in the past week. It is not to this manor born, but belongs to New York, where it was played with some immense success to crowded houses until it played out."
Wow, they
So
really just
apparently,
didn't have the internet back then. They were like,
no.
this was, like, fun and games?
Yes, this is fun and games. Yeah. So the great Tom Collins hoax of 1874,
What? Stop it.
yes,
Does
was
this have a
so
wiki page?
that's a good question. I should look into that. So was so internationally well known that 2 years later, Jerry Thomas included his own Tom Collins recipe in the Bartender's
Wow.
Guide. His initial recipe was kind of a bit complicated, not super complicated, but it called for sort of very specific, hard to find ingredients. So over the years, bartenders started to simplify it into the Tom Collins recipe that we recognize today.
Okay.
So while this seems to be the most commonly accepted origin story for the Tom Collins, Our dear friend, cocktail historian David Wondrich,
Uh-oh.
believes that it actually may have come from a bartender in London whose name was John Collins. He worked at this really popular London hotel in the 1870s, and a lot of the hotels in London at the time were famous for serving gin punches to their clientele. That was sort of just like the drink of the day. Everybody drank gin punch.
Yeah, you can make a
But
batch of it and they just, poured it out.
exactly.
Yeah.
But John Collins worked at this really sort of trendy hotel where young people like to go and party it up, listen to like young people music of the 1870s and get wild.
Oh,
And
no.
cocktails were a relatively new invention at the time, so young people wanted cocktails. So he basically turned the standard London hotel version of a gin punch into a cocktail, and he called it a John Collins. But it was made with Old Tom gin.
Okay.
Yes, and then
Okay.
so it's possible that people just
Hmm.
accidentally mixed up the names Tom and John and started calling it a Tom Collins. It is also possible, Wondrich didn't say this, but I'm also thinking that because of the timing of this, that people may have just heard of this, the
Prank?
the Tom Collins hoax of 1874, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna have a John Collins or a Tom
Tom
Collins," and
Collins, yeah.
yeah. So that also is a possibility that both
Oh, of
stories are sort of
course.
true at the same time, you
Yeah.
know? So
Hmm.
whichever story is true, maybe they're both true, sort of.
Yeah.
What we do know for sure is that by 1876, the recipe that that or a variation on the recipe that we're drinking today had found its way into Jerry Thomas's bartender's guide. Along with the lemon juice and soda water, Thomas's recipe called for gum syrup as a sweetener,
Oh.
and yeah, likely would have been made with an old world Dutch Genever gin, but instead modern versions use London dry gin and simple syrup with the lemon juice and soda. So yeah, that's the Tom Collins. Let's take a taste.
Yeah.
When I was a kid at school learning the golden rule, teacher often used to say, if you don't tell a lie, there's not a reason why you can't be like Washington someday. How could Washington be a married man and never, never tell a lie?
It has all of my favorite flavors, so
It's so good.
it's
It's so
perfect.
good.
It's perfect. Like,
The gin
s
is like nice and ginny, junipery, crisp, and then the lemon juice is super bright and
yeah.
tart. There's like just enough simple syrup to sweeten it up a little bit without
Yeah.
being
It's
too
not
much.
it's not too sweet, but it's so good.
Yeah.
Like, I'm surprised we haven't had it before, but yeah, this I kind of sorta remember the gin punch, but
This was all the way back in episode 7,
yeah.
so it's been a long time.
Yeah.
The gin punch that we had was basically almost identical to this, but just with sort of a different history. Yeah, it's so tasty, so
It's
refreshing.
very, very drinkable.
Anything with I
Citrus
mean,
and
like
gin
yeah, citrus and
has
gin,
me. Like,
that's
has a hold on me.
that's our bread and butter, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well
that's like, sort of like a gin Ricky, but with lemon instead of lime.
oh, yeah.
We
Yeah,
loved that gin Ricky,
yeah, it
remember?
was just soda
Yeah,
water. Yeah.
soda water, lime juice, gin, and
What
simple
era
syrup.
was that? Do you remember? Was that it wasn't the '70s, no.
No, gin Ricky is older. I mean, but this
Older?
recipe is also older too. This just
Okay.
happened to still be popular in the
Popular in the
1970s.
'70s, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like the gin Ricky recipe was older too. But I could have used this cocktail for any era, honestly.
Yeah, it's so good.
But
It's a
apparently
classic.
they were really having a moment again in the 1970s.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's it.
Cool.
That's the Tom Collins, our
Yeah.
guest for the day.
So, yeah, my scandal is from the 1970s. This was a decade of really awful drinks, but also a decade of revolutionary energy and protest culture. The country
Yeah.
was in a state of political and social upheaval, which is like, yes, please. It
Mhm.
needed to happen. At this time, we had really strong movements for civil rights, for women's rights, for LGBTQ plus rights. We had a powerful opposition to the really corrupt, unjust war against Vietnam at the
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
So these were issues that were driving a lot of people, young and old, into the streets in protest. It was just, yeah, a revolutionary ass time. And many groups were pushing for change and advocating for their rights as citizens. And the disability rights movement was no exception.
Ah,
I don't know if you're familiar. Have you ever heard of the 504 sit-ins?
no. No, not at all.
Okay. So in 1977, hundreds of activists with disabilities took a stand and sparked a movement that would change the course of history for all of us. And that is
Amazing.
my scandal today, that protest. It was known
Yes.
as the 501 sit ins. It is currently still the longest nonviolent occupation of a federal building in US history.
Wow,
Yeah.
amazing.
I found out about this story in researching the assassination of Mayor Moscone and
Oh,
Harvey Milk. I think I
okay.
mentioned during that episode that there were disabled people who were like holed up in a federal building. Do you remember
Yes, I
that?
do remember that, yeah.
Yeah. And how Moscone's just like, yeah, and
Yeah,
go on.
yeah. Let them
Um,
let them do what they're doing, yeah.
yeah. So between April 5th and April 28th, these activists, they organized, they protested, and they occupied government buildings all around the country.
Wow.
Yeah. In order to pressure the Carter administration to enact Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. I'm going to get into like what that was. Essentially, they wanted the government to get off their ass and do its job and publish these really long delayed regulations that were a guide to how to enforce this law. Like they wrote a law and
Okay.
they're just like, job done. We did
Yeah.
it, y'all. Mission accomplished. Like, and the disabled community is like, nah, bitch. No,
You didn't do anything.
you did nothing. You wrote some words down.
Yeah.
So it was basically vibes. Like they wrote down some words and they're just like, we're listening and we're learning, but we're not going to put anything into action.
Yeah, good vibes only.
Good vibe. Exactly. Right. So, but first, a toast.
A toast.
Let us raise this toast is one of my favorite toasts. Let us
Ah,
raise our glass very high to this toast feels evergreen. It feels like a toast for every season to forcing the Democrats to do the right thing because that's not their natural inclination. Cheers.
not at all. Oh my god.
Right? To forcing them to do their fucking jobs. So, as I said, the events leading up to this 504 sit in, it stemmed from a failure of the US government to do its job to enforce this Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. This act came out of, well, I guess was inspired by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it mandated that people with disabilities should be integrated into mainstream institutions like everyone else. Like, we
Yeah.
can't just have different classes of people. Like, this is not what this country professes to be about. And yet,
Yeah.
and
Jeez.
yet. So the language was really broad. This is like a quote from the 504 section. It said that no qualified individual with a disability should, only by reason of his or her disability, be excluded from the participation in or be denied the benefits of or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal assistance. So it's
Okay.
basically saying that if you get government money, you can't discriminate against this class of people.
Sure.
Duh, right?
Great. Love it.
But because this bill went before the Nixon administration, he was kind of like, I'm not signing this. Like,
Oh.
this would regulate corporations, and
Ah.
I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be expanding the federal government. That's
Mhm.
bad.
That means yeah. That you're taking it from good vibes to good deeds, and we can't have that.
No, we can't. We can't. So in 1972, a group called Disabled in Action, they demonstrated in New York City. They organized some sit-ins protesting one of the vetoes. I think he vetoed it like 4 times. So
Good lord.
it was trash, This man, I'm not
Just as I
surprised.
thought.
Exactly, just as I thought. So, this
Trash.
protest, it was done on Madison Ave, like, prime shopping area in New York City. They shut down traffic. It was a big thing. It was led by a woman named Judith E. Human, and she would become a key player in these later sit-ins. She had a lot of organizing experience from other civil rights kind of, demonstrations. So her and
Okay.
80 of her besties, they had a sit-in on Madison Ave. They stopped traffic. So events like this, because this happened in many cities, not just New York, in DC, LA, and in San Francisco, there were demonstrations like this protesting that they were kind of refusing to make any, regulations to this law because, I mean, they had a lot of excuses, but essentially they thought it put an undue burden on corporations and smaller local governments to yeah, your face.
I just like, you're getting so much money from the government, you
Yes,
know, that if that's the whole thing is like you're getting if you weren't getting money from the government, you wouldn't have to participate in this.
correct, correct.
So
Yes,
use some of that fucking money to like put in an
exactly.
elevator or do whatever you got to do.
Yes. Yes, widen a staircase, like, just yeah, it's crazy, yeah. This is not targeting private business, this is targeting businesses who are getting federal funds, like, it's
Ridiculous.
so yeah, it's ridiculous. So, it's worth noting that before the passage of this law, disability had been defined by what's called as a medical model of rehabilitation. It meant that disabled people were supposed to be, like, basically trying to be like able-bodied people. That was the goal. And it was very, like, paternalistic.
That's not possible for some
Uh,
people.
Thank you. Yeah.
Like, that's great if you're talking about, like, somebody who needs physical rehabilitation to get back to being able-bodied in the way they once were
Yeah.
or could be, but,
Mhm.
like, that's not the case for a lot of probably majority of disabled people.
Yeah, no, it's true. So these laws, they started in the colonial era and they were created to protect the protect is like air quotes around protect like the wider community from the financial burden of having to
Ugh.
care for I know, having to care for people with disabilities. So just as a caveat, I learned a lot about disability history researching this story,
Mhm.
and I learned that saying like disabled person while it's not like, incorrect is not it's not what they would like to be called. They prefer terms that lead with their humanity, person with a disability,
Okay,
people with
sure.
disability, people living with disability. So,
Great.
I adjusted my outline, but if I slip up, just please autocorrect it in your mind. I'm
Yeah.
trying to be better, but we don't
It's
learn about things like this and how words have meaning
no,
and
exactly. It's always a journey, and it's I mean, even for us, every time I'm writing a new story, I'm constantly trying to adjust the way I use our language because,
yeah.
like you said, words have meaning.
Words have meaning in language evolves. Like,
Yeah,
I thankfully, I Googled it because like, my whole outline was, like, disabled person," and I'm like, "Okay,
yeah,
I'm saying the things. I'm not saying, like" I mean, there's so many horrible terms that, I'm not even
yeah,
gonna
of
say,
course.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
thankfully, I Googled it, and I'm like, "Oh, of course, like, I get this."
yeah,
So I adjusted everything, but, just in case it comes back out, I'm trying.
yeah. No, I mean that's the important thing is that,
Yeah.
recognizing that you have something to learn, and it's adjusting to that.
Yeah, and I think it's good to let other people know because I had no clue. Like,
Yeah,
here I was being like, "Okay, I got this." Like, but let me
yeah.
just Google it. Let me just make sure. During the 20th century, there were a lot of efforts to improve the condition of people living with disabilities. It was mostly focused on veterans
Okay.
until FDR. So yeah, FDR was a turning point. He helped to establish a lot more regulation and also just like rights for people living with disabilities.
Is his, like, influence part of the reason that there was a focus on sort of, like, rehabilitation rather than just accepting that some people live with disabilities?
Um,
Because he himself was so focused on trying to, like, regain the use of his
yes,
legs.
he was, yeah. And his family spent a lot of money on, are you familiar with the March of Dimes,
Yes, yeah,
organization? Which,
yeah.
like, I learned recently, like, that's why he's on the dime.
Oh, I
Yeah!
didn't know that.
I learned that in my research. But yeah, I think I'm not 100% if, like, he's the reason why or, like, that was just the vibe, like,
Yeah,
the movement of the day.
mhm.
I think a lot of it I mean, yeah. I cut a lot from my outline because there's a lot in disability history in the era of eugenics that I've kind of
Oh,
touched
sure.
upon,
Mhm.
that I think I don't know. There's a lot of minis that I could do that could spin off of this, but
Yeah,
I didn't look too deeply into FDR other than his administration because they had such a long time in office. They did a lot for,
okay,
people with disabilities, and also his family did a lot of, like, financing research, and
okay,
I think
yeah,
some of it was, like, not good at all, like, very eugenics-y,
yeah, that
some of
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that has a lot to do with the time period
Yeah,
that was just
definitely.
super popular at the time.
Yeah, that's what like, that was the progressive view,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So, even after FDR was doing all of these great things, or at least he was doing things for Americans he was doing
I mean,
things for
I'm sure
Americans.
that some of the things he was doing
Yeah,
were good.
that's true. Some of it
Yeah.
was good. But people were still being institutionalized, and they were
Mhm.
still being denied basic rights and a lot of opportunity. Many of them weren't allowed to work even if they could. There was
Yeah.
just a lot of discrimination. So the
Mhm.
Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was supposed to change all of that. Like,
Okay.
everyone was so excited when this was signed into law, and they're like, "Let's go." But
Mhm.
so just to backtrack a little bit to talk about how people with disabilities felt at the time, because there was a culture of paternalism and, you know, eugenics was still floating around, people with living with disabilities, they internalized their oppression. They
Mhm.
really thought that, "Oh, I can't attend this university because I can't walk."
Yeah.
And that's my own personal problem.
Yeah.
Most of these people, they did not think the issues that they faced daily were the product of prejudice or discrimination. I found a quote from an activist who I'm going to be quoting a lot because she's an author and yeah, a disability rights activist, and she's still kicking it and still pushing people, and I'm obsessed with her. So she
Yeah.
said that at the time that there was no access for disabled people, no right to an education, there was no public transit. You couldn't get into a library or a city hall, much less a courtroom. There were no federally mandated social services or agencies for individuals living with disabilities. If an individual wanted to hire an in home attendant or even just an interpreter, they had to happen through a pre existing social network.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't have that.
Of
So
course, yeah.
there was a lot of people just left out, like people on
Mhm.
the margins. And with the passing of this bill, people living with disabilities, they started to talk about like, "Oh yeah, we should be able to go to a court or go to a library." Like, it is fucked up that we can't take our wheelchairs into public spaces like everyone
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So, they started to understand disability as a societal problem, not a personal failing as what that was what the culture had told them prior to this.
Mhm.
So, with this law, discrimination of people with disabilities was now legally documented, and this was a massive first step.
Yeah.
However, for the law to become effective, it needed regulation. It
And enforcement. Yeah.
Yes. Like, at this time, they had no definition for, like, who was a disabled person or
I was
what.
going to ask that, like, what did that mean in this law? But it was just sort of like, "Eh."
Yeah. It it meant whatever you want it to mean. Like, There was no rubric for, like, what constituted discrimination or non-discrimination, in what context. It was just words, basically. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
they didn't go any deeper than the surface. They didn't
Mhm.
have any sort of timeline for enforcement. They had no enforcement, period. So, in the
Wild.
absence right? Like, the fact that they wrote this law and thought that their job was done is offensive. What is the purpose of this?
Yeah.
Like, who what? So
It's like they signed the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, and they're just like, "It's done. All the rivers and lakes and all the smog, it's all gone.
it's
Everything's
all
great.
gone. Look at this.
We just
Points
did it."
to points to document.
Yeah.
So, in the absence of any sort of code or regulation, there are a lot, if you can believe this, there are a lot of contradictory rulings.
Yeah.
Who could have imagined that judges would just wildly interpret the law in different ways based on their own, preconceived notions about people living with disabilities? So there was one case, I mean, there were so many cases, but there was one case that involved the right of a wheelchair user to use a public bus, in which the
Okay.
decision said that if the driver stopped and opened the doors, that was non discrimination.
What?
Yeah.
And it was up to the person in the wheelchair to be able to figure it out from there?
Just to fly up the stairs. In the same week, another case acknowledged that steps, prevented a wheelchair user from boarding.
In the
So this
same
is
week?
same week. Yeah.
2 different judges in different
Yeah.
places. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Wild.
So things like this were happening all over the country. Like, it was wild. So the HEW had to have really strong laws. So all the other government agencies could, like, kind of piggyback off of it. So between 1973, when this law went on to the books, and
Uh-huh.
1977, no regulations were issued.
Jesus Christ.
4 years of
So
just, like,
it's
nothing.
it's on the books.
We did
That's the
it.
important part,
We did what you
and
guys wanted.
we're not gonna do a single fucking thing to enforce it at all.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So all the while, people living with disabilities, they're like, "Fuck this." Like, you
Yeah, it's
guys
garbage.
need to make a law that has teeth, that has rules, so different localities can follow these rules. Like, it shouldn't be this difficult, and yet here we are.
Yeah.
So during this period, there were many civil rights attorneys who sent working with these organizations that helped people living with disabilities. These lawyers, they basically did their job for them. They essentially wrote regulations and they were just like, "Hey, sign these. Make
Yeah.
these laws. Like, if
Yeah.
since it's too hard for you guys to do your job, like, we did it for you."
Mhm.
They sent it to the secretary of the HEW. They said, like, "Hey, this is our recommendation. Like, we've passed this around. Like, everyone agrees that, like, this is basically what we want." And they asked them to, because I guess the process is that you have to publish, or at least the process at that time was that you had to publish laws to something called this Federal Register. And after it was in the Federal Register, it would be open to public debate, and then it would go through the normal, process.
Okay.
So they published this recommendation, they sent it to the Federal Register, and then nothing. Crickets.
Jesus.
Crickets. And this stalling, this 4 years of just nothing, it allowed a lot of opposition to grow from hospitals, from universities, from state and county governments. They were all saying, like, "Oh, we don't have the funds, even though you're giving us funds. We don't have the funds
Yeah.
to make any changes." But don't look at our books. We just trust us. We don't have the funds. We're doing other things with that money that you sent us. So the HEW, and this is wild. So many different accounts that I read were like, this is not what you're supposed to do. The HEW, they sent these regulations to Congress. It was so unusual. Congress sent them right back, like, "What the fuck is this? Like, do your own work." Like, we we have,
But we already did the work. You guys do your work now,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yes. Precisely. So the HEW, because they were being forced, they're like, okay, we have to do something. So they published what they called a quote, intent to purpose regulations, which is basically they're saying that we need to study things more, even though we had 4 years and we sat
Uh-huh.
on our ass and we did nothing. We need we're going to propose something, just give us time.
Uh-huh.
And again, crickets. Crickets.
Okay.
During this time, the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities, the ACCD, was formed. This group formed only with the sole purpose of forcing DC to make regulations. They're like, bet, like, if you're not going to do anything, we are going to create an organization to be up in your ass. And not
Exactly.
in a good way. Not
Yeah.
in a pleasurable way. Like,
Yeah, you're not gonna just sit here and fucking
yeah,
act like you did the
like you
work
did
already when you
something.
haven't done
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
And
You wrote some,
we're gonna tell you every day.
yeah. Amazing. So once the Carter administration was in office, activists were so excited. They're like, finally, we have someone who's going to listen. They're going to sign this into law. It's going to be great. We're going to get regulations. Like, they're going to change things. We're going to be able to be full citizens.
Yeah,
About that.
I don't know about all this.
I know.
Bless their hearts.
But we all know that excitement when
When there's a more progressive candidate that
when
gets in
there's a sea
power.
change, to be like, oh my God, like, this is our time, this is our moment. Like, we have all of our ducks in a row. Like, this is gonna be
Mhm.
great. And it wasn't great.
Shocking.
Right?
Shocking.
So instead of signing these fucking regulations, the HEW, they set up yet another task force with
How much
no.
time has passed at this point?
So
Since
it's
the
been like
initial
4.5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah. So they set up this task force. Of course, there's no representation from the community,
Yeah.
or there's no people living with disabilities there.
They don't have access to the building, probably.
Yes. Yes. Not probably, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was no access. This task force was supposed to study them,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
like, no, nothing about us without us. Fuck this. So it became really, really clear through all of the delays, through all of the excuses. There were also some leaks that said basically that they were trying to weaken the regulations that was sent by the civil
Jesus.
rights lawyers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. This is Saint Carter's administration, y'all. So the ACCD, again, this is that organization that was set up to just be on them. They
Mhm.
demanded regulations, and they set a time limit. They said you have
Oh.
until April 4th, 1977 to write these laws.
Mhm.
Don't water them down. Don't change them. We have perfected these laws over the past 4.5 years. Just
Mhm.
sign the documents. And they
Or what?
yeah. So they warned that they were going to have protests the next day if nothing happened.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. Yeah. They said that there was going to be a sit-in at 8 different HEW regional headquarters all around the country if they did nothing. If the
Mhm.
secretary, this guy named Joseph Califano, if he didn't sign this into law, they were going to find out the
Yeah.
following day. This concludes the fucking around portion.
Come back after this message
Yes.
and you'll find out.
You will find out.
Amazing.
Jesus.
And it looks like we're live here.
I'm one of your hosts, Hamish.
And I'm your other host, Aaron Conway.
And welcome to our show,
The Third Wheel.
And today we're joined by...
Hello everyone, I'm Anna Blackburn.
I'm Josh.
My name's James.
Yes, I'm Nish.
My name's Sneeja.
I'm Gina.
Hi everyone, I'm Lil.
This is Yakashri.
I'm Tam.
Hi, I'm Deja.
I'm Nikhil.
I'm Ashley.
My name's Dar.
I'm Shami.
That's just a few of our previous guests. Every episode we're joined by a third wheel to hear their story, debate some juicy topics and play some games. You can find us everywhere at thirdwheel.fm and follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook at The Third Wheel FM.
Like jumping on this podcast, the third wheel. I love being the third wheel right now. It's fantastic.
They were done playing these games. They said, you have 24 hours, bitch. Make it happen. Or we're going to make something else happen.
Yeah, okay.
So hundreds of people arrived in San Francisco. They came with backpacks, bulging with food. They came with their medication. They had all of their supplies. They had their caregivers, the ones who needed caregivers. This group included adults, teenagers, support staff, and parents with their kids. They came from all around the Bay Area, and they were really diverse from like a socioeconomic perspective, which was nice to see. Again, this was back in the 70s when poor people could afford to live in San Francisco. Back in the day. So this crowd, it was mostly people who were blind, deaf, people who were using wheelchairs. There were some people who arrived that were living with mental disabilities, and there were people who were paraplegic and quadriplegic as well. And in cities across the country that morning, similarly diverse groups assembled to picket their regional office of the HEW. There were demonstrations in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Philadelphia, New York, and Seattle, as well as the largest demonstration was in DC, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So there were about 300 people in Washington, D.C. who marched to and then demonstrated inside of the office of the secretary of the HEW, Joseph Califano. They arrive and he vanishes. You know, he just had a meeting. He just got called out, you guys. Coincidence. Thankfully, he understood the optics of like, people arrive to hold you accountable and you just disappear? Curious. Very, very curious. So he met with a few representatives. He met with the head of the ACCD, a man named Frank Bowell. And even as they push him, he's like, we just need to do more study, guys.
Oh
like,
my God.
We don't feel comfortable. We don't feel confident in making regulations, even though you're providing us with them. We just need to do more study, you know?
You have had like an entire presidential term plus to figure this fucking out.
Yes.
What's the holdup?
Correct. The holdup is maintaining the status quo, which is, I think, the role of Democrats sometimes. In my darkest days, I feel like that is what they do. So he met with these protesters, he met with these leaders of these organizations, and still he refused to sign the regulations. This action in DC, it led the protesters to be like, okay, fine, we're camping here, bitch. Like, we're going to wait. If you need another 24 hours, we're going to be here. But these protesters, they had to leave after 28 hours because they did not plan to be there overnight. They thought that, hey, there's enough of us. We're going to force him to do the right thing. So they had to leave for food related reasons, and for some people for medical reasons, because they did not bring the medications that they needed to be in DC in a long, stay type of situation. Yeah, so they made it this 28 hours. The FBI also put pressure on them, which was really, really shitty. They like cut power to the building. And it's like, God. These people are living with disability. Like, what are you? They wanted them out, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So most of the protests ended that day in these different cities. However, San Francisco kept going. The San Francisco protest was planned by Judith Human, which I mentioned earlier, Kitty Cone, who was a queer leader in the city, and Mary Jane Owen. These women were like, had planned for this.
Mhm.
And this is the power, I think, of women who have access to power. Like, they're able to plan, they're able to strategize, they're able to work with other people. So for years, Human and Cone had been laying the groundwork amongst just the local population. They worked with organizations, community members, and they also did a lot of outreach to people who were living with disabilities, and they educated them about their rights. Because these people, they weren't really following the news, and like also there was no real news happening.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they were letting them know that, hey, there's this law in the books that they're not enforcing because they ain't shit. Do you want to come and protest with us? And they're like, hell yes, we do.
Yeah.
So they realized early, Human and Cone, that they wanted to plan something bigger and something that was a bit more accessible for their community. They wanted to put real pressure on the local like HEW director, a man named Joseph Maldonado,
Mhm.
who reported to his boss in Washington, Joseph Califano. They sound very similar.
Yeah.
The Josephs ain't shit. That's all you need to know. The
I was
Josephs
actually
ain't
going
shit.
to ask, was this chapter of the organization the only one that was run by women?
They were the only ones, yes.
So they were
Fully,
the only ones prepared
yes. Yes.
because
Yeah.
women were in charge.
In leadership roles, all women, like it was only women in leadership roles, and 2 of the women were queer. So
Yeah.
they were doing shit, and they were planning to do shit.
Yeah. They were not believing that the government was going to just be like, "Oh, 24 hours, we got this."
Oh, you're right. You're so right. Yeah. They knew. Yeah. They weren't like, "Oh, if we ask, they're going to do it." No. They're not
And if
gonna
we
do
show
it.
up for like 3 hours, they're going to be like, "Oh, okay, you're here. Well, I guess I gotta."
Yeah, no, they were living in reality.
Yes, yeah.
These women, yes.
Yeah.
So they had been planning this for years, actually,
Mm.
because they knew that it had to be big, and they had 4.5 years to be shown that the government is not going to do shit. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
You have to do something really, really big. So because they were organizing people who were living with disabilities, there were a lot of logistical challenges to just people getting there,
Yeah.
people using public transportation. That's something that we definitely take for granted. But due to the physical nature of the people who were protesting, they knew that it was going to be difficult to move a large number of people back and forth to like the federal building every day.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
the federal building was inaccessible. Like, this was one of the things that 504 was supposed to address.
Yeah.
So they knew that like once we get here, we just need to hold the building. We can't go back and forth. We
Mhm.
need to stay here and make this building our home.
I love that the government, like, not only did they not force corporations to like follow the law that they just wrote into law, they didn't follow it themselves.
No, they most certainly did not. So these women, they planned for a larger occupation in advance, but they planned in a way where they didn't alert too many participants because they would learn later. They had some suspicions that the FBI was monitoring them, and that was
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
They were on watch lists. So they
Mhm.
didn't want to tell too many people because they didn't want law enforcement to, hear things they weren't supposed to hear, which is crazy. It's like, wow, you're surveilling a man in a wheelchair pushing for his rights. Okay, cool. Cool,
This
cool,
is what
cool.
the FBI is spending their time doing.
Yeah. Yes.
You're not trying to stop like
Yes.
terrorists from trying to
Nope.
blow buildings up. You're literally trying to stop anyone who wants more rights
Yeah.
from pushing the status quo forward.
You're trying to prevent children in wheelchairs from getting to the library.
Like poor Black children from having lunch. Like,
Yeah.
this is what you're spending your time doing, killing people. So to make sure
Yeah.
that poor children can't have food.
Correct.
Good
So,
times.
I mean, it's always a good time.
What
This
a
is
great
like,
use of taxpayer monies.
oh, yes. So So they didn't want, the 50 to get wise. So they're like,
Mhm.
okay, it can only be like 100 of us, but like,
Okay.
don't tell nobody, but come here
Mhm.
and like bring your
Mhm.
shit. So this is really fucked up, but also really amazing. So just because of the way that people felt about, because of all the discrimination towards people living with disabilities, they never saw this shit coming, like at all.
Yeah.
They look at these people with pity. They're just like, there's no way that they can like, have
They
a
can't do
protest that
anything.
they can't
Yeah.
exactly. They can't do anything. And
Yeah.
because of those sentiments, like these protesters were able to like make use of that really fucked up, like, that pity that they got from the public.
Yeah. Yeah.
They never saw this coming. And also, when they did take the building, the local government was very afraid of like a PR nightmare of
Sure.
like
What, you're gonna,
a
like, drag people out of their wheelchairs in the
yes,
street in front of cameras and shit?
yes. And most of them are children. So
Yeah.
they're just like, we can't arrest little Johnny in his wheelchair. This is bad. Their whole thing was like, oh, like how long can they last? Like just look at
Exactly.
them.
We just have to wait it out.
Yeah,
And that's all they needed to do in everywhere
exactly.
that wasn't run by queer women who knew
Who knew?
what they were up against.
Yeah. And planned for the resistance. Like, I'm
Mhm.
gonna get into it, but like these women are, two of them are still alive. Like the planning that they did was
Yeah.
truly inspiring. Like this story is, I'm holding it together, but this story is like very emotional for me because it's
Yeah.
just it's amazing on so many levels. So the protesters who occupied the federal building in San Francisco, they were mostly young. Most of the people were under 25. It was a very racially diverse group. It was like 50-50, like non-white to white, which was kind of amazing. But again, this is back in the 70s when people could afford to be in San Francisco.
Mhm.
Unlike most of the other protest movements at the time, the 504 occupation was led by women and it
Yeah.
had queer women at the forefront. As opposed, I mean, the feminist movement was run by women, but they pushed the queer women to the back.
Yeah.
They let
Yeah.
them do logistics, but like they were never up front. Like the queer women were up front in this movement, which was really amazing. So they climbed to the HEW's fourth floor. That was where Maldonado's office was, and they refused to leave. Initially, the HEW, they did what they did in other cities. They used these tactics. They shut off the power. They tried to do all this, fucked up shit. But because it was San Francisco and there was this environment of activism and social justice, many of these protesters had outside supporters and allies.
Yeah.
So they knew that they couldn't go like too far,
Uh-huh.
or the news of it all, again, that PR sort of nightmare that they were afraid of. They like went to a point, they didn't do what they did in DC in San Francisco because they couldn't.
Yeah.
So there were a number of people who were involved in the 501 protests that had previously participated in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War protests. So they were able to instruct everyone else, like this was not their first rodeo, like they knew how,
Mhm.
unfortunately, how to deal with the FBI, and they provided a lot of know-how. And it's sad that they had to do that, but like it was such great like community knowledge to be like, this is what they're going to try to do and this is what we're going to do in response.
Mhm.
Like amazing.
Yeah.
So protesting, like we've gone to protest together.
Yeah.
And
Actually, we were just at the Women's March. Well, the day that we are recording this is the anniversary, because I saw on my time hop
oh,
today,
is it?
is to the day, like 4 years ago, the last
my
time we went to the Women's March, pre-COVID.
Oh my God, I remember that.
Yeah. And
Wow,
it
to the
snowed.
day. Yeah. So fucking cold. Crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you felt this, but like that day I was so fucking tired. And we weren't even out there like all day.
No,
But like
not at
the
all.
following day, like my back hurt.
Yeah.
So yeah, protesting is a lot. It's very taxing on your body. Even if you're just standing around, And for many of these protesters, the 504 sit-ins was the first time that they spent any time like outside of their house,
Yeah.
sleeping or even just like living, existing for a long period of time outside their house. And
I
many,
can't imagine like you
right?
have to have a certain system to
Mhm.
make things. I mean, I'm sure it must have sort of been exhilarating at the same time to
Yeah,
like,
I'm gonna get into that. Yeah.
okay,
The
yeah.
atmosphere was, yeah, definitely exhilarating. It's, yeah, I'm gonna get into it. But it was the first time a lot of people living with disabilities like met others who had either had their disability or had different disabilities. Like the
Mhm.
whole community vibe of it all was really, really nice.
It must
Um,
have been, yeah, really. I mean, as much as I'm sure it was very difficult, I'm sure it
yeah.
was also really fun for people to like
Yeah.
meet a bunch of new people and
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, it seems like, well, no, I shouldn't say it seems. I was gonna say it seems like their biggest hurdle was just getting there because transit was so bad back then.
Sure,
Um,
yeah.
like so bad. If you had a wheelchair, you basically had to be like in the back of a van to get
Mhm.
anywhere. But once inside of the HEW offices, their needs for just like a comfortable space like became really apparent. And they knew this going into it and they tried to make some accommodations, but it was a lot for some people. I think it
Yeah,
would be a
yeah.
lot for anyone, actually.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
anyone. It would be a lot for me just sleeping on the floor, let alone
I
like,
I'm too old for that shit. I'm not I
right?
used to love camping. I need
Yeah.
an air mattress and like outlets
So
and
most of these people were like 25 and
still
below.
they
I know,
have
still,
yeah,
totally, totally. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not saying like, "Oh, they should suck it up." I'm just saying like the fact that you feel like you can't be on the ground now
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
is
I'm not
different.
sleeping on hard dirt anymore.
Yeah, no. Those days are long past you.
Mhm.
So there were people who had most of the people had very, very special needs. There were people who required space for walking aids, for wheelchairs, people who were deaf, they needed their translators. Most of their translators were there, but there were some people who were like sharing translators, which was amazing. The protesters with paraplegia and quadriplegia, they needed assistance to lift and turn them every so often, especially when they were sleeping or when they were sitting for long periods to prevent sores.
Mhm.
So over the course of a lot of weeks, they did have like kind
Weeks.
of, yeah,
Wild.
rudimentary accommodations. They were fucking serious though. These
Amazing.
these protesters, they compromised their health to achieve their goals.
Yeah.
And some of them live with the toll of just this, I think it was 28 days. For years, they live with like, "Oh,
I'm sure, yeah.
yeah.
Like, they're not asking for much.
No, they're asking for you to enforce the law that you wrote." That's
You
all.
already it's already law. You passed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
All they're asking is for you to enforce it.
Yeah. For you to make rules and regulations so it can be enforced nationwide. That's what federal laws are supposed to do. So, like, they're not asking for anything really, you know?
Oh
Mess.
gosh, yeah.
So, I know this is, like, supposed to be my fun story. It has a good ending, you guys. Stay with me. It has a good ending. So, just a bit about the Bay Area, and I think most people already know this, but, like, I did learn a little bit. So the Bay Area definitely, I don't think this could have happened in any other place because of, not just because it was such a politically progressive place, but they had a high density of people living with disabilities because they had access to public transit, because they had good weather, because they had
Mhm.
wide and well maintained sidewalks. It
Yeah.
made that area really desirable for people with disabilities.
Was public transit accessible
No.
in San Francisco?
I
Okay,
mean, people are really kind and would help, but no.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, by one estimate, there were 400 people living with disabilities in Berkeley in 1972. 4 years later, that number was closer to 5,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So, they kind of had like a critical mass at this point. They had enough
Yeah.
people who were all in the community. They could reach out and talk to them like, "Hey, even if you can't come to the building, like we kind of need your help in whatever capacity you can manage." And
Yeah.
again, because it's organized by women, like it was so grassroots, like they went door to door. and they talked to people, they talked to parents, like they talked to people at they did all of the things. Like they followed the playbook of the civil rights movement, and they were really committed to this event, and they knew that it was going to take a lot of support.
Yeah.
So San Francisco, as all of us know, in the 1970s had a lot of, like I said, it had a lot of disabled people living with disabilities, but there was also a huge LGBTQ plus community. Obviously, there were a lot of Black folks there. That's where the Black Panthers started, in San Francisco.
Oh, I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, Oakland.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So these marginalized populations, they are accustomed to a type of cooperation I think is lacking in the greater society. There is an interdependence. There's an assumption that, like, I need you to survive, like we need each other. There's community, essentially.
Sure.
And community was necessary. Like, it was the critical factor in this protest, this 504 protests. So there were 100 plus, they say it was around 120 plus occupiers, but they also came with their attendants, and immediately they started making the space their own. They draped like plastic over air conditioning units, and they turned that into areas that could store their medication. They turned them basically into fridges.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
that's so cool.
I think people with disabilities, and also just marginalized people, are resourceful. Like, you have to be. You have to be. So they use payphones to communicate with their loved ones and the media until the FBI cut their phone lines.
Trash.
The FBI is going to FBI, you guys.
That they are.
So they had meetings every day. Like, they had, I guess, kind of similar to, I'm sure Occupy borrowed this just from like civil rights and like protests in general, but they had like meetings every day. Like, everything was done like by committee. They were always talking to each other. So they started strategizing ways to respond to false bomb scares, because they knew that that was possible. This was like the FBI's MO, was to call in a bomb scare to a place where people were organizing. Like,
so that everyone would leave and then they could close down the building.
Yeah, exactly. So they started to basically do drills for this. Like, we're not fucking going anywhere. We're going to check for bombs ourselves, but there's no bombs here, but we're not fucking going anywhere. They're not going to get us, you know?
Yeah.
Incredible. So despite their very rough accommodations, most of them were just sleeping on the floor on the stairs. Like, I'm going to put a lot of, there's amazing video. I think I can clip the video and put it online, but also there's great photographs about this whole event. But the protesters, like, the vibe was like they were having a good time despite aches and pains and just, the physicality of it all. Their spirits were very high. There was a lot of sex happening.
Amazing.
Like,
I love that
a lot
for them.
of sex. Apparently there was like one elevator was just like you went
sex
there
elevator
to have sex. Yes.
I want to go to the sex elevator.
Thank you. Same. Can I please, Mother, may I go to the sex elevator? So they played cards. This was the time of Passover and Easter. They had Passover and Easter celebrations. Women took turns washing each other's hair in the bathroom sinks. Like, there's all these videos, really cool videos. I hope I can put them online. But O'Toole, she wasn't a main organizer, but she was one of the people who was at the 405 protest. She recalls a deaf man, because the FBI had cut the phone lines, trash. So there were people who were outside of the building who were able to communicate via sign language.
Through the windows and stuff.
Through the windows, yes.
That's amazing.
Right? So good. God,
I love that.
It's like, you thought you were going to stop us, but like, we have other ways.
Yeah.
We have nonverbal ways to communicate, bitch.
God.
Okay? Yeah. Oh my God. It's
incredible.
This whole story is just, it's so inspiring.
So what were the people who worked in this building, what were they doing while this was all happening?
they were not allowed in the building. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
so
gonna
even like the director
yeah.
was not there while this was all going down.
Yeah. I'm gonna get into this, but the Black Panther Party provided support
For
this protest.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, like refusing to let people in.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's
Right?
incredible. Yeah.
So this woman who was at the protest was at the occupation, I should say. She saw like this deaf man communicating to this crowd. He's like half out the window and she's like holding him back so he doesn't like fall out of the
Oh,
window
yeah.
as he's communicating their message because the FBI cut the phone lines, so they didn't want the press communicating with them basically.
Yeah.
They didn't want they didn't want anyone else knowing about it, and they're just like, "We have other ways." So, they had formed a committee, the, occupiers. They gave everyone a job. You were either doing food, you were on, like, safety. Again, this is women organizing. You were
Mhm.
doing cleanup, you were in charge of, entertainment or communication. They had people who were in charge of fundraising. They're like, "If you have rich friends, they need to send us their coins right now."
Right? Yeah.
So those who couldn't occupy the HEW offices, they held daily rallies because they wanted that public and like media attention every single day. They're like, "We're
Yeah.
still here, bitch." This is probably one of my favorite parts of the story. So the Salvation Army, they gave the protesters cots and blankets so they wouldn't have to sleep on the floor.
Oh, good for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
It's because they were disabled, not queer. I'm sorry, people with disabilities and not queer.
Yes. Yes. So the mayor also lended his support, as I mentioned earlier. He was one of the biggest supporters of the group, and he would eventually travel to DC with them to force the
Amazing.
government to do the right thing.
Yeah, good
And
for
it's
him.
so
That's
sad. It's like this is the
I
guy who
know.
was assassinated. Like he could have
Yeah.
done so much.
Yeah. That's how you get assassinated.
You're right. You're right. Way to bring reality into this. So yeah. So the biggest issue was really them being comfortable, but also food. Food was
Okay.
needed to
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
the protests going. And initially, because again, they underestimated the strength of this community, initially people were able to go and leave. Like they could leave, they could gather money, they gather donations for food, they could get food. But eventually there came a time where they weren't letting them leave the building. They're just like, if you leave, you're not coming back in. And they're like, okay, well,
Okay.
we're gonna stay. But McDonald's, this is my favorite part. McDonald's and Safeway contributed food in the
That's
spirit
amazing.
of guests helping the handicap.
Oh, okay.
They contributed food until they realized that it was civil disobedience.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, I thought you guys were just hungry. You're trying to push for rights? No, we're not gonna." And they
They're
stopped
like,
giving
wait.
them food.
Yeah, they're like, wait, if you get these lost pass, we're gonna have to pay to
Yes.
put like, oh my God. Never
Actually, they're
mind.
not though because they're not getting public funds.
I
But
mean, eventually though. They didn't know this was coming down the line,
yeah,
but eventually they would.
yeah.
They didn't know about the ADA
No, they didn't know
coming
about
down
the
the
ADA.
stream.
Yeah. So it was funny that they gave food and then they stopped. They're like, "Oh, you guys are doing
That's
bad things."
ridiculous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Bad things.
Yeah, I mean,
Asking for your rights.
yes, how dare you? We thought we were being the white knights.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So I mentioned previously that the Black Panther Party was involved, and they're kind of an often ignored, I wonder why, group that really helped the success of this movement. I don't think they would have lasted as long as they did without the Black Panther Party doing what they
Mhm.
did. The party, they understood what it meant to be intersectional. They supported all revolutionary movements at the time. And they had a few members who were living with disability. There was a man named Bradley Lomax. He was a Panther. He joined the 504 sit-ins on day one, along with his assistant, Chuck Jackson. He assisted a lot of other people who were there that day and throughout the duration of the protests. And because of that, the Black Panthers were just like, whatever you guys need, we are here for you. They released a statement that said, "We support you because you're asking America to change, to treat you like human beings, like you belong. We
Mhm.
always support people fighting for their rights."
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so when the FBI tried to prevent them from delivering food, the Panthers held their ground. They're like, "Okay, we're just going to stand here with our guns and we'll see what's what."
Mhm.
So, beginning that first week, continuing until the end of the occupation, local Panthers cooked and carried food, hot meals across the bay from Oakland and San Francisco every single day
That's
until the
amazing.
end of the occupation. They never asked for money. They're just like, "You are engaged in the revolutionary struggle and we support you." The
Amazing. I
end,
love that. Yes.
right? But this is collective action.
Yeah.
We used to know how to do it, but like this story is just, yeah, it's everything. So of the 120 or so protesters, 14 individuals with disabilities and 8 of their attendants, they were selected to go to DC to force a meeting with Califano because they had held the building for weeks and they're just like, "Okay, nothing's happening. We are getting media attention, which is great, but like nothing's happening in DC. Like we need to go to fucking DC. We need to make them do what they said that they were going to do." And this was a unanimous decision. Again, like everything was consensus driven because it was organized by women. They're like, "We're not just going to
Yeah.
do power play shit. Like, we're going to vote on this. We're going to deliberate. We're going to make power moves together."
Hell yeah.
Right? Oh my God. I fucking love this story. So these people leave the building and the FBI is like, "Oh, we got them. Some of them left. We got this."
Oh, you
So
didn't know.
they didn't know. They didn't know at all. So, yeah, the FBI, who had been monitoring the building, still didn't really get like, "Oh, like their solidarity is a thing. What?
Yeah.
Community is a thing." These hoes thought with 22 people gone that they could just roll up into this building and then they could force the remaining people to leave. And they couldn't be more wrong. So
Yeah.
they started with the false bomb scares and they were
Oh, for
ready.
fuck's sake.
They were ready. They're just like, "Okay, let this fake bomb go off."
Yeah. We'll be
L
here.
Looks at watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing happens. So once the DC contingent, once they left, yeah, the San Francisco occupiers, their only focus was holding the building because they knew that without sustained media coverage, like people are just going to continue to ignore their plight. They needed that building and they held on to it.
Yeah.
So the protesters in DC, they arrived. They arrived with Mayor Moscone, which is again amazing. They also had another partner on the ground in DC, the Machinists Union. The people who
Okay.
like they had a bunch of U-Hauls. They're like, "Hey, if you guys in wheelchairs, like we can transport you around. It's gonna be dark back there, but like we can hold all of you."
Amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
So they arrive in DC. The machinists like bring them to Califano's office,
Mhm.
basically, and they protest outside at first. They're singing hymns from the civil rights movement. They're singing "We Shall Overcome." There's a lot of press coverage. It's amazing. The co-organizers of the protest in San Francisco, Judy Human, she gave a really amazing speech. I just have like a small quote. I'm going to put video of this on Instagram. But she said, "I can tell you that every time you raise the issue of separate but equal, the outrage of disabled individuals across this country is going to continue. It's going to be ignited. There will be more takeovers of buildings until maybe you begin to understand our position. We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. We want the law enforced," which is not too much to ask.
Not at
Just
all.
enforce the law that you wrote.
If you
Like,
didn't want to if you
why do we
didn't
got
want
to
it
do all
enforced,
this?
why'd you sign it into law in the first
Thank
place?
you. Thank you. That is the question. It's like they're not asking for the moon. They're asking for you to make the law that you fucking wrote real.
Yeah.
So in the following days, because I mean, Democrats are better than Republicans generally, but still, they're not about doing right things unless force, it seems. So in the days that followed, the group followed them everywhere they went because they had this U-Haul that would just take them like, "Okay, he's over here now. Let's."
Yeah.
They caught President Carter at church. Man had to duck out of the building. He
Oh my
had to
god.
leave the sermon. I know, trash. trash. But they followed Califano to a press club. He too ducked out of the back. And they're just like, we're on you, bitch. We're gonna find you. Like, you
No,
can't do this
we're not gonna
forever.
let you fucking just live your life.
Yeah, we
We're gonna
came
make
all the way from California. Like, you're gonna do this. You're
yeah.
gonna do this. So, due to bad press, not because he's doing the right things, but due to bad press, Califano finally relented and he signed the regulations on April 28th, 1977. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So under 504, non-discrimination became a legal fundamental right. Within months, like so quickly, things
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
Sit-ins, this fucking worked, and it worked really fast. They saw pretty quickly in university classrooms, started to become accessible, workplaces, public spaces like libraries, like courtrooms, public transit started to make accommodations for people using wheelchairs and other people living with disabilities. Cities instituted curb cuts because that was not a thing that was found outside of there were some in San Francisco, but like it's something that we all take for granted and we all benefit from the fact that the curb slopes and there's not just like these, we're not jumping off curbs.
Oh, you don't have to step up. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
That started to be a mandate in public spaces. Yeah, federal buildings started to make adjustments to become more accessible to all, including ramps, wider restroom stalls, of course. The regulations that were instituted as a result of this passage of the 504, it ushered in a new era of accessibility, and it led to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And I'm just going to end by talking a little bit about the occupiers and like how their lives were changed as a result of this event that was so formative for these young people. Many occupiers had never met people, as I mentioned, with disabilities, and they really bonded over this common sense of purpose. Like they were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And it was so obvious because, like, duh.
Mhm.
So one woman, because there's a documentary about this, I'm going to put it in the show notes. One woman who was filmed during the occupation, she said that I used to know what I would wish for. I wanted to be beautiful. I wanted to stop being a cripple. But now I know that I'm beautiful. And summing it up later, another person in this documentary said that it didn't matter if you were mentally retarded, blind, or deaf. Everyone felt we are beautiful. We are powerful. We are strong. We are important. And yeah, big facts. And they did that shit. And they
It's
changed
amazing.
the world for all of us. I think a lot of people think that when things are accessible, it's like, oh, it's just for people who are living with disabilities. No, we all benefit from this shit. And even
Yeah.
if we didn't, like, it's still the right thing to do.
Mhm.
So yeah, the end.
That was amazing. Thank
Wasn't
you for
that
telling
fun?
that.
I feel like
Yeah.
it could have been
Wow.
more fun, but like it's such a good story.
No, it's great. It's amazing. And you said that it wasn't scandalous. That was very scandalous. That that they would pass this law and just be like, we don't actually have to make it happen. We already did what we needed to do.
It's so incredibly offensive that they
Yeah.
really thought that they could write down some words and that would be it. In my head, don't even do anything. If you're not going to do it, like don't do it. Like why
Literally,
even
what was
write
the
it?
what was the point of getting it passed if you weren't going to do
It
anything?
doesn't make any sense. It's like it was so infuriating to like read, just research this story and be like, but they're not asking for anything other than for what you already agreed to be real. Like
Ridiculous. Oh my gosh.
what?
Yeah.
What?
Wild. Well, no, thank you.
Trash.
That was really, I'm so glad that I know that. That was such a great story. Definitely a positive story for once in a while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? I think that's why I didn't think it was scandalous because I'm like, wait, something positive happened that
It's still
made
a
our
scandal.
country better,
Yeah.
which is sadly scandalous. Like, oh
Yeah.
my
I
God,
know, right? Yeah.
people working together, pushing for change. But yeah, I feel like this story should be like screamed from the mountaintops that we can make change if we work together
Right.
and we
Yeah.
let women lead.
Well, and that's the scandal part of it is that like
Yeah.
it wasn't the government that made things better.
Nope. Nope.
They were dragging their feet and
Yeah.
didn't want to do anything.
Didn't wanna do
And
shit.
they had to be forced to make things better.
Yeah.
Trash.
By a coalition led by women,
Yeah.
led by
Yeah.
queer women,
Yeah.
in partnership with everyone else
Yeah.
who was down with the struggle. Yeah.
Every other marginalized community, anyways.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, my drink has been empty. I feel like
Yeah.
people probably heard my ice cubes clinking like 20 minutes ago.
My drink is now empty. Oh,
Yeah.
so good. This drink
It's
is
so
so
tasty.
good.
Yeah, it's entirely too drinkable.
Damn.
America's history is juicy. We just add gin and lemon juice and
Yeah.
sodie.
Sody water. Oh my
Thank you
god, my
guys.
coworker, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go yeah.
But on Thursday we had a team meeting. My boss is from Staten Island. I can say this because she's listened to a few episodes, but she stopped listening like 2 years ago, which is
Okay.
amazing. But she's so Staten Island, and I find it so delicious when she like allows herself to like slip back into like just how she talks. She was talking
Yeah.
about quotawatas. Do you remember?
Who?
Yeah, exactly. Do you remember those like barrels from like barrels of like colored juice?
Oh yeah, what were they called? Like hugs, I think they were
Yes,
called?
hugs. But like in New
Yeah.
York, because they were a quarter, they called them quotawatas.
Oh. Amazing.
Right? I was just like,
Quotawatas.
quotawatas. I'm like, and
Incredible.
I giggled, and she's like, "Oh, my accent slipped out." I'm like, "Yes." It
Huh.
did.
Quotawatas.
Quotawatas. I love
Amazing.
it.
Yeah, I always just knew them as hugs.
Yeah, I also knew them as hugs. And I thought and I didn't mention this in our call because it just seemed because I'm the only person on my team who's not from New York or New Jersey, and they always like delight in the things I don't know, and like the
Yeah.
fact that I call tennis shoes instead of sneakers. Like there's just so many things. So I didn't want to expose myself, but yeah, I also call them hugs.
Okay. I mean, I'm from upstate New York, but it's not
Upstate
the
New
same
York
as
is
New York
basically
City.
the Midwest.
It
It
totally
truly
is. Yeah.
is the Midwest.
Yeah.
Like there's so much overlap. But yeah, I couldn't tell them hugs because everyone else was like, yeah, quotawatas. And I'm like, yes, totally.
Everyone knows what that is.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, yeah, we didn't add any quotawatas, just sodie.
Sodie.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to Beyond Reproach. This has been Tux Lerzel.
And Stephanie Domingo.
And thank you to our audio editor, Dev. We could not do this without him.
Facts are
All
facts,
right.
America.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Beyond Reproach. Please note that we are not historians. We're just a couple of drunks who never shut up and love history. A full list of all source information can be found in the show notes on our website. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Written reviews are especially important. If you like us, please do one of two things. Leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts or send this episode to a friend, family member, or someone who you think would be into it. Don't forget to follow us on social media and make sure you follow us on Instagram because we post our cocktail recipes the Thursday before each full episode. Please drink along with us if you are not driving. We also have a shop on beyondreproachpod.com. Get your merch, brand yourselves. And we also have exclusive content on Patreon where you can directly support the production of our show.